Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. Eli Rogers stared at the screen, his fingers twitching with the reflexes honed over years of training. His gaze flicked to the countdown timer ticking in the corner of his hooded 10 minutes until the World Championship began. Outside his apartment window, the night sky twinkled with stars, a stark reminder of how far humanity had come. He was in New York City, but in a few minutes, he would be on a simulated battlefield, commanding starships as if he were on the edge of the galaxy. He cracked his knuckles and pulled on his gaming headset. "This is it," he muttered to himself. For years, he had worked to master Starship Commander, the most popular strategy game in the world. It wasn't just a game, it was the gateway to real-life glory. Elite players were recruited into the ranks of the United Earth's Starship fleet, and Eli intended to be one of them. The arena lobby filled with the avatars of other competitors, familiar faces from tournaments past, some new blood, too. He took a deep breath. The competition was fierce, but Eli was no stranger to pressure. He was known for his unshakable calm under fire, the ability to pull off the impossible in the final seconds of a match. "Eli, you ready?" A familiar voice broke through his concentration. He glanced at the comms overlay. It was Lena, his closest rival and occasional teammate. Her avatar shimmered beside his on the screen, a sleek figure with a helmet etched in red, a sharp contrast to his own dark blue battle armor. "Always," he replied, flashing a confident grin, though she couldn't see it. Lena was as sharp as they came, her strategies often unpredictable, and she had nearly taken him down in last year's finals. "I'll see you in the finals, then." "No hard feelings when I take the win, right?" Eli chuckled. "You can try." As the minutes ticked away, the competitors vanished one by one, transported into their individual battles for the first round. Eli's heart pounded in his chest as his screen darkened, only to flare back to life, revealing the star field of his battlefield. "Here we go," he whispered. His fleet materialized around him, a sleek array of destroyers, frigates, and a single dreadnought, the pride of his virtual armada. The opening moves were key: setting up resource extraction, positioning ships, securing choke points. The map was a standard starfield with asteroid belts and nebulae acting as cover and resources to mine. He clicked through the opening commands with precision, his ships splitting into two formations. The destroyers and frigates flanked the edges of the map, scouting for the enemy, while the dreadnought hung back, its massive cannons ready to decimate anything that got too close. Within minutes, contact. His scouts reported enemy activity near the asteroid belt to the east, and he sent his faster ships to harass them while his heavier vessels moved in from the west. The first skirmish went as expected. His opponent was aggressive but sloppy, overextending their forces too early. Eli's frigates tore through their defenses, and by the time the dreadnought unleashed its firepower, the enemy fleet was in full retreat. "Too easy," he muttered, but he knew better than to get cocky. The first few rounds were usually against less experienced players, those who had talent but lacked the depth of strategy required to go far in the tournament. The real challenge would come later. Hours passed as Eli moved through the competition, each match harder than the last. His victories were hard-fought but decisive, and by the time the sun began to rise outside his window, he was one of the few remaining players. The final rounds loomed, and his nerves were a tight coil of adrenaline and anticipation. He leaned back in his chair during the brief intermission, taking a moment to relax. The apartment was quiet, save for the hum of the cooling fans in his rig. He ran a hand through his hair and stretched his neck, the tension building in his muscles. "Just 2 more matches." The comms crackled to life again. "You're on fire today." Lena's voice broke through the silence. "But you haven't faced me yet." "Still time for you to mess it up," he joked, but his mind was already shifting to the next battle. "Funny." "See you on the field." The screen blinked, and his next opponent's name appeared. Juno. Eli blinked. That wasn't a name he recognized at all. Considering he knew most of the top players, he brushed the thought aside and focused on the battle at hand. The stakes were getting higher. As the match began, Eli couldn't shake the odd feeling creeping up his spine. Juno's fleet appeared on the far side of the battlefield, and something about their formation seemed a broken bar different. The way they moved was too precise, too calculated. Eli's fleet surged forward, launching a wave of small fighters to probe Juno's defenses. But instead of engaging in a typical skirmish, Juno's ships split into two perfect formations, drawing Eli's forces into a trap. His fighters were obliterated in seconds. What the hell? Eli scrambled to adjust, ordering his frigates to pull back and regroup. But Juno's ships pressed the advantage, cutting through his fleet like they knew his every move. Every counter he attempted was met with an immediate, brutal response. How was this possible? Eli muttered under his breath, sweat beading on his forehead. He'd never been outmaneuvered like this before. It was like Juno was reading his mind. Desperation surged as his ships fell one by one. He couldn't afford to lose a knot this close to the finals. In a last-ditch effort, he ordered his dreadnought to the center of the battlefield, drawing Juno's fleet in for an all-out brawl. It was risky, but it was the only chance he had. As his ships collided with Juno's, the game seemed to glitch. The starfield flickered, and for a split second, Eli swore he saw something, a broken bar reel. A distant star, a formation of ships, and not in the game, but in space. His breath caught in his throat. That's impossible, he whispered. But the thought was already taking root in his mind. He shook his head, focusing back on the battle. With a final, devastating volley from his dreadnought, he managed to cripple Juno's flagship, forcing them to retreat. The match ended with his narrow victory, but the unease lingered. Later, when he should have been resting, Eli found himself scouring through the game's forums, trying to make sense of what he had seen. Was it a bug, a strange Easter egg? He couldn't find any mention of the phenomenon, but then a message popped up in his inbox. You saw it, didn't you? The sender was anonymous, and the message was brief. Eli's heart raced. He hesitated before replying, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. What did I see? The response came almost instantly. The connection. The game isn't just a game. Everything you do matters. Eli stared at the screen, his mind reeling. What the hell did that mean? He typed another response, but before he could send it, the message vanished, along with the sender's profile. It was as if the message had never existed. He sat back in his chair, staring at the blank screen. The room felt colder now, and a sense of dread settled over him. What if it was true? What if Starship Commander wasn't just a game? But that was absurd, right? The final match loomed, and Eli knew he needed to focus. He couldn't let distractions mess with his head. But the strange message gnawed at the back of his mind, refusing to be ignored. The day of the championship final arrived. Eli's stomach was a knot of nerves. But not because of the match. It was that nagging feeling of the creeping suspicion that something was terribly wrong. He logged into the game, his hands shaking slightly as the familiar starfield filled his screen. His opponent? Juno. Not again, he muttered. The previous match against Juno had been brutal, and this time, he wasn't sure he could pull off another win. But it was more than that now. There was something off about Juno. Something that didn't sit right with him. As the battle commenced, Eli's mind was split between the game and the questions swirling in his head. His fleet moved with precision, but Juno's was once again one step ahead. It was like they could anticipate his every move. Just as Eli was about to launch a critical assault, the starfield flickered again. This time, the glitch lasted longer. He saw real ships and massive warships moving in a distant star system. And then he heard it, faint at first but growing louder, the sound of real combat. Eli's heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't a game anymore. This was real. Eli's fingers hovered over the controls, trembling. His eyes darted between the simulated battlefield and the eerie, persistent glitch showing real starships beyond his screen. This wasn't some elaborate prank, and it wasn't a bug. There was a connection between the game and reality, and now he was caught in the middle of it. Juno's forces pressed forward in the game, but Eli's mind was elsewhere. The sound of real battle, distant explosions, the hum of engines, the voices shouting commands reverberated in his headset as if it were happening in his own living room. He swallowed hard, shaking off the panic rising in his throat. He had to focus. He slammed his hands back onto the controls, issuing orders with newfound urgency. His fleet moved to intercept Juno's, but Eli wasn't playing to win the championship anymore. He was playing for something much bigger. Juno's tactics were sharp, and the battle raged on with unrelenting intensity. Their ships started through asteroid fields, using the terrain to outmaneuver Eli's heavier fleet. But something in Eli's gut told him that Juno wasn't just playing for the tournament either. Juno's every move seemed deliberate, calculated to affect something beyond the game, beyond the virtual battlefield. Eli watched as his frigates engaged Juno's forces, firing in controlled bursts, but every explosion in the game echoed with an eerie resonance. The real battle out there, wherever it was, seemed to mirror his actions. He couldn't shake the feeling that every strategic decision he made was impacting a real fleet of ships, with real lives on the line. His comms crackled. It wasn't Lena this time. It was a voice he didn't recognize. "Rogers, listen to me. Your match isn't just a simulation. You're controlling a real fleet. We don't have time to explain everything, but Juno is manipulating the game for their own gain. If you lose this, entire colonies will fall." Eli froze. "Who the hell are you?" "No time, just trust me. Juno is working for a rogue faction within the United Earth Fleet. They're using the game to control real military operations across several systems. You need to win this battle, or millions will die." The line went dead. Eli stared at the screen, his heart racing. What had started as a high-stakes tournament had turned into a nightmare. He didn't have all the answers, but the stakes were clear. Juno wasn't just playing for a title, he was playing for power. And Eli was the only thing standing in his way. He shifted his strategy, pulling his forces back to regroup. Juno's fleet surged ahead, smelling blood in the water. But Eli wasn't retreating. He was setting a trap. If what the voice on the comms said was true, then he needed to think like a real commander, not just a gamer. Juno's ships closed in, and for a moment, Eli let them believe they had the upper hand. His dreadnought hung back, its shields flickering as it absorbed hit after hit. The smaller frigates and destroyers in his fleet danced around Juno's ships, harassing them just enough to keep their attention divided. Eli's eyes darted to the edges of the battlefield. He had sent a squadron of stealth bombers on a wide arc, out of Juno's sight, and now they were in position. He took a deep breath, fingers steady on the controls, and issued the command. The bombers struck in perfect formation, their payloads detonating against Juno's flagship. The ship buckled under the assault, its shields collapsing. Juno's fleet faltered, confused by the sudden turn of events, and Eli's forces pressed the advantage. His dreadnought moved in for the kill, its massive cannons firing in synchronized volleys. Juno's flagship exploded in a brilliant burst of light, and the rest of his fleet began to crumble. Eli didn't have time to celebrate. As the game declared his victory, the screen flickered again, and the real battlefield snapped into focus. He wasn't seeing a simulation anymore. He was seeing through the eyes of a real fleet commander. A fleet of ships, identical to the ones he had just commanded, hovered in space above a planet, their weapons still hot from battle. In the distance, another fleet was in retreat. Juno's forces. Eli's hands trembled as he pulled off his headset. The room was silent now, save for the faint hum of his gaming rig. He stared at the screen, heart pounding, trying to make sense of everything. The comms crackled again, and this time the voice was clearer. "Well done, Rogers. You just saved millions of lives." "Who are you?" Eli demanded. "What the hell is going on?" There was a pause. "Let's just say we've been watching you for a while. You're more than just a gamer now. You're a commander. And the war out there? It's very real. We'll be in touch." The line went dead. Eli sat back, staring at the screen as the simulated battlefield dissolved into the main menu of the game. His name flashed in bold letters: a world champion. But the title meant nothing to him now. He wasn't just a player anymore. He had commanded real ships, fought a real battle, and saved real lives. He stood up, the weight of everything pressing down on him. The game, the tournament, the championship, it had all been a lie. Or maybe it had been the truth all along, and he had been too blind to see it. Either way, nothing would ever be the same. As he stared out the window, the stars twinkled in the distance. Somewhere out there, real ships were still fighting, real lives were still at stake. And now, for better or worse, Eli Rogers was part of it. The game wasn't over. It had only just begun.